So, hi everyone. Welcome to Temple Beth David. So, I'm Susan Ivory, and we welcome those who are here with us and going to have an opportunity to sample some food from our author. And to those of you who are with us via link, via Zoom. So, here at Temple Beth David, we've been working hard planning for this activity, and it really takes a team. And there's just a few people that I owe a big thanks to. First, Robin Evans, who is she is our past sisterhood president, to Carol Ozer, our current sisterhood president, to Arlene Bailey, our current president of Temple Beth David, and also to Mike Sirota, and where's Justine Cortez, and also my husband Peter. Okay, you guys, so I'm going to turn it over to Denise Schaefer. She's the co-chair from the Federation for this for the book event. Thank you.
And thank you, Susan. Temple Beth David was a pleasure to work with. So thank you all. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome everyone online. We've got quite a number of participants online, and it warms my heart and everyone on the committee to see such a wonderful turnout and to be back in person. So thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Denise Schaefer. I'm the co-chair along with Debbie Noble, and I'll be moderating this evening. I did also want to thank and recognize Rabbi Len Muroff, who is the rabbi here, and thank you for joining us tonight. Before we start the program, it takes a tremendous amount of effort and commitment to create this festival. So I'd like to acknowledge some of the people involved in putting the programs together. So first, our hardworking committee, if you would just raise your hand, and our chair, Linda Mazer. Any advanced readers in the audience? We go through over 300 books to select our 13 programs, so thank you for that. The Federation staff, and Rebecca Russell is our new coordinator this year, so welcome. The Jewish Book Council in New York that offers us authors, and our tech wizard, Jake Tavel, who's behind the scenes in New York making all this happen, working with Mike to have a split screen so you can watch the demo and listen to our speaker. And lastly, our literary circle members. Your financial support makes the entire festival possible. So thank you very much. I would also like to welcome representatives from our Federation Board of Governors. Thank you for joining us and all your efforts, thank you, on behalf of our Jewish community. So online is the president, Julie Solberg, who wasn't able to join tonight, and John Carlton, where are you? Our immediate past president and chief financial officer. So thank you for joining as well. Just a few housekeeping items for those of you here in person. In case of any emergency, that is the exit door to the outside. And if you haven't the gate is open. Okay, thank you. And if you haven't already done so, if you'd kindly silence your cell phones. Okay, let's get started. This evening's program is going to be a presentation and a cooking demonstration, a few recipes from, I actually forgot your cookbook, from, sorry, Cooking alla Giudia.
Goodness.
Okay. Right, so you'll get to taste several of the recipes. So let me introduce, with pleasure, tonight's author. Benedetta Jasmine Guetta is an Italian food writer and photographer who grew up in Milan, Italy, and now lives in Santa Monica. In 2009, while still at the university, she co-founded the Italian Jewish food blog Labna.it and started teaching cooking classes for young urban Jews. For the last decade, she has worked to discover and preserve Italy's rich and diverse Jewish culinary heritage. Since moving here, she's opened the Lovey Cafe in Santa Monica, and I personally made a visit and had a delicious sandwich with fresh challah. So if you're ever out in that area. Her work as a food writer has appeared in magazines throughout Europe, and she's published 2 previous cookbooks in Italy. With a collection of kosher recipes from all regions of Italy, Benedetta shows how Jewish Italian food is a thing of its own. Cooking alla Giudia is her first English language cookbook. So I'm going to turn it over to Benedetta.
Thank you. I think I got my
yeah,
microphone
that's
so I can just have my hands free. And I'm going to step in front just so I can talk to you guys and have our slides if our friends in New York can help us with that. Do we? Fingers crossed. If not, we'll go without slides very easily. I've got them tattooed in my head. There we go. Slide. I think the introduction we already did because I've been kindly presented. So here we go. We can start here. So when I wrote this book about the Jewish cuisine of Italy, I had a plan. I wanted to tell people, especially abroad, that the Jews of Italy, first of all, exist. Funnily enough, since I moved to the US, I get asked this question a lot. I come from Italy and they tell me, but are there Jews in Italy? And I'm like, yeah, there is. Not very many of us, truth be told. There's like 32,000. We're a teeny-weeny community. Any city in the US has a bigger community than the whole of Italy as a country. But despite the fact that there isn't a lot of us, we do exist. And the one other thing that people might have heard about the Jews of Italy is, do you eat the fried artichokes? I'm like, yes, we do. In Rome, in one season, only in the spring, just a few months. I don't know how is it that this is the one dish that crossed the border to the US, but that's the famous dish. So I was forced to put it on the cover of my book. Literally, I was against it. However, there is much more to our cuisine than that. So those are the famous artichokes. Don't even try to make them in the US because they will not turn out as nice. Because in the US we have a different type of artichokes than we do in Italy. So you can try, but they will not be as yummy as they are when you try them in Rome while you're visiting. But we do have a lot of other recipes. When I started writing the book, I had over 400 that I wanted to include. I had to trim them down to 150. But that just goes to prove that there's a lot of recipes that I think need to see the light. They need to sort of leave the archives and the notebooks of the grandmothers in Italy and sort of make it out in the wider world. So slide if we can. Amazing. So I will try to keep the history as concise and small as I can, but I do want to give you a little tour of the Jewish history just to put the food into context for us. So the Jews arrived in the Italian peninsula back in the Republican age of Rome. We're talking over 2,000 years ago. And those Jews that established themselves in Italy, they were not Ashkenazis, as we think of them. They were not Sephardics. They came straight from the motherland, straight from Israel, because they were brought as slaves during the Judeo-Roman wars. So the one characteristic that I want you to take away here about the Jews of Italy is that they're nothing like the Jews that you know of. They don't, no, I swear, they don't cook like you do. They don't pray like you do. We have our own set of rituals, our own set of prayers, our songs. It's an entirely specific community with its own customs that, like I said, are unlike anything that we generally think of when we think of Jewish. Especially in America, people think of Jewish as Ashkenazi Jews. So whenever you say Jewish food, you think bagels, you think matzah balls, you think gefilte fish. None of that exists in Italy. Zero. I see your face. I see the disbelief. We live without matzo balls. We raise our children without, successfully, more or less. So no. So we have a whole cuisine that is entirely separate, and so are all of our other customs and traditions. And that's what I've tried to collect in the book. On the one hand, the recipes, most importantly, but also whoever got a copy of the book will see it, a bit of the history and the culture, and what do we do for the Jewish holidays, because not all the things that you do here we would do there, and vice versa. So that's it for the fact that we're not Sephardi and not Ashkenazi. Slides, easy, amazing. So like I said, I'll keep the history to the absolute minimum. I already told you about the Jewish-Roman wars, when the Jews first established themselves in Italy. Now, a few other important dates that we want to remember, and I'm trimming them down as I look at the slides. Most important one for the beginning is the Alhambra Decree. We're all familiar with the moment when the Jews were expelled from Spain, roughly. When the Jews were expelled from Spain, southern Italy was a part of Spain. So when that happened to the Spanish Jews, also the southern Italian Jews had to resettle. Hold this date in mind because it will be relevant for our food transitions. Other two dates that you want to keep in mind, and again, I'll get back to them later, are the creation of the ghettos of Venice and Rome, respectively in 1516 and 1555. Now, I don't know, again, how many of you are familiar with the idea of a ghetto being an Italian idea. Italians invented ghettos, which is not something we should be proud of, but it's a fact. Even the word ghetto itself comes from the Venetian dialect, and it indicates literally the area where the ghetto was established. When Italians created ghettos at the beginning, they just wanted to keep the Jews away from people that were harming them. And then the whole concept flipped on, let's keep the Jews in their own quarters away from everyone else. The idea of a ghetto is important to us from a culinary perspective because within the walls of the ghetto, the recipes and the history and the culture were preserved. So we think of a ghetto generally in negative terms, but there is a silver lining to the notion of a ghetto, which we will see when we look into some more recipes that originated and that were preserved in the ghettos, which is the fact that the ghetto somehow segregated not only the people, but their culture as well. And that enabled the culture in a way to survive. We'll get back to that again. And then for the dates, we do want to keep in mind later on what happened in recent history, but I'll get back to this slide later when it's relevant. So we can start with the food. At least you start seeing pictures of food. Eventually, I'm told that you also get the real food. But let's start with the pictures. So when I started writing this book, I had to answer a question. What is Jewish Italian food? Somebody in the audience earlier told me, I'm Jewish and I'm Italian, and I was of origin. And I was just thinking, wonderful. However, that doesn't make what you cook necessarily Jewish Italian, right? So no, if it wasn't meant as a joke, it was a real thing. In the sense that we're not talking about bringing the two traditions together. It's not a fusion thing. What I was trying to collect were the historical recipes that had a Jewish history in Italy. And on the other hand, what were the Italian recipes where the Jews had a major contribution to the birth or the creation of a recipe. So it's a bit of a historically grounded effort rather than, for example, when we think of, California, Chinese, whatever, all of these mixtures that people do these days when they put two kitchens together. So I was trying to answer two questions. What do I call Jewish Italian food? And how did Jews and Italians influence each other's cultures? Because when you think about it, Italians have lived in Italy for millennia. And so there had to be an interaction between the two cultures, some influence of one over the other and vice versa. When we think about Italian food, it's very easy to paint it with a broad brush and say, the pizza and pasta and mozzarella and whatever else that comes to mind when you think about Italian food. But there is much more to Italian food than that. And in particular, I wanted to cast a light, I guess, on the Jewish contribution to what we think of as Italian food. I have stopped hearing myself, but I'm assuming we're good with audio. Like, depending if I turn or if I don't turn, it's still good? It's mixed? Okay. If I need to turn this way, I can also turn this way a bit. Okay. Okay, so slide, please. Okay, so here are a few dishes that I think have an interesting history. I'm actually told that one of them is right there on the table, so you can taste it later. So hold your horses, but we'll get there. I don't think we want to see the chart. No worries. On the left is a caponata. A caponata is a Jewish dish. Actually, can we go back to the slide before? I had a second thought. I forgot this picture. I didn't want to skip it because it's important. So let's go back to this one. On the right, there's a dish called orecchiette. They come from southern Italy, from the region of Apulia. And if you ask Italians, where do orecchiette come from, they're very proud to tell you they're an Apulian dish. Authentic, local, like their grandmother used to make. However, and this is the first of the stories that I'll tell you that have, Jewish side to them, orecchiette were not invented in Apulia, despite the fact that Italians really want them to be. Orecchiette were born in Provence, in southern France, and it was the Jewish merchants that brought them to Italy. If you think about orecchiette means little ears. There aren't many religions in which we eat the ears of our enemies, right? I mean, it's the Osnei Aman for Purim type of thing. So these were the Jews that prepared this pasta shape for Purim, brought it to Italy from southern France, and Italians adopted it. Yet they have no idea. Like, if you go to southern Italy today and you go like, oh, this is a Jewish thing, they're like, no way. I'm like, yes, I swear. It got me quite the amount of hatred. So every time I go and I spoil the party and I tell them this stuff is Jewish, people are like, no way. I'm like, yeah, it is. So this was just one story, and now I can change slide, and I got the other one, which I was about to tell you, the eggplant caponata. So eggplants. Caponata is a dish from southern Sicily, from the southern Italy, from Sicily. And it's made of eggplants. It's eggplants, tomatoes, capers, olives, onions. It's some sort of a stew. Now, Italians didn't cook with eggplants for centuries. Until the late 17th century, Italians had no idea what eggplants were. They had this vegetable growing somewhere, and they thought, and I'm quoting actual books from those days, they thought that eggplants were food for Jews and for dogs, literally. They thought they could be poisonous. The name itself, melanzana, loosely came from Latin, saying the apple that could be poisonous. And so Italians were steering away from this vegetable. They had no idea how to cook with it. The Jews that established themselves in Italy, who lived in Sicily specifically, were used to trading with the Arabs. They traded in the Mediterranean. And the Arabs, for example, in Turkey, cooked intensively with eggplant. That was an ingredient that they knew how to cook with. So the Jews brought this ingredient with them, taught Italians how to cook with it, to the point that eventually now when we think about, the Parmigiana, or there are so many dishes that we think of as Italian because they have eggplant in it. But all of these dishes would have never existed if the Jews didn't contribute this ingredient to, our cuisine. So I just like to claim eggplants for us. It's a bit of a, Italians like sports. I'm competitive like that. I want my team to have all of the recipes and all of the ingredients. On the other side of that slide, to the right, I have two dishes that have the opposite history. These are Jewish dishes that actually not anymore specifically Jewish, but these are dishes of Jewish origin that you cook, that you can try in Italy today, that had another story. That's the story of how Italians influenced Jewish cuisine. So specifically, because I told you I was just trying to see how the influence went both ways. So specifically, the popes. Popes historically have not been very friendly to our people. In Italy in particular, Italy being the seat of the papacy and having such a Catholic population, the popes were very against Jews. And over the centuries, they came up with the most creative ways to make the life of Jews absolutely miserable. just, for the fun of it. So one of the ways that the Pope at some point decided to make the Jews unhappy was to create a rule about the consumption of luxury goods. Now, you need to imagine the Jews were already in a ghetto. They were poor like you would not imagine, like really, really poor, dire poverty, living one on top of each other, barely had food. But the Pope decided to make a rule about luxury again for them. And at some point, he decided that the Jews were only allowed to eat small fish. So even if you were a Jew that accidentally that month had collected some money and could buy a bigger fish, you were only allowed to buy sardines, anchovies, the teeny weeny fishes that are somewhat less desirable than, the nice big meaty ones. Just to oppress the Jews for no reason. And the Jews had to obey because, the Pope ruled the land. So they started creating recipes that specifically featured the only fish that they were allowed to eat, such as I said, anchovies. You'll find a few recipes with these fishes in the book. And so that's how, for example, the bottom dish came to be. That's a dish of anchovies baked with endive. Endive was just a curly herb that grew abundant in the region. Anchovies were what the Jews were allowed to eat because the Pope was mean. And they came up with this dish, which is eventually baked. That's actually raw. But that's before it went into the oven, which is super delicious. It's amazing. We still eat it to this day in the Roman ghetto. It's considered the local specialty. But it wasn't born out of, the fact that we like to cook. It was born out of the fact that we had no other choice in this specific case. Similarly, the dish above, that's the Roman fish soup. So the ghetto, when it was established in Rome, the second one that that Italians established, it was established in a very undesirable neighborhood. It was built practically next to the river Tiber in a very unhealthy area with dead land, like you couldn't do much with that land, that area, next to the fish market. Nobody wants to live near a fish market. It stinks, it's ugly. So they put the ghetto right there where the fish market was. And like I said, the women of the ghetto and the population of the ghetto were really, really poor. They could barely make a living because among other things, they were not allowed almost any profession. So you couldn't have really a job. You were poor and starving, but you had the fish market nearby. So what would the women of the ghetto do? They would go to the fish market after the market ended, collected whatever scraps of heads and tails of bones of fishes that were available, hopefully kosher ones, and they would boil them because that was the most wholesome, safe, healthy way to make something out of these leftovers. And that's how the Roman fish soup was born. Now, if you go to Rome, you can find it in very fancy restaurants, both in the ghetto and outside the ghetto, because it's considered the local specialty. But it was born out of necessity for poverty, out of the dedication and the efforts of the women of the ghetto. So the influence, as you can see, and as you would read if you get the book, the influence went both ways. Jews shaped one way or another the way Italians ate, and Italians more or less consciously shaped the way the Jewish population ate. Slide, please. Okay, hopefully we're all aligned on kosher things, like we know the rules, or do I go through? Quick nods. Everybody good with kosher? Very good. So we can skip the ABC of eating kosher. Amazing. But we do want to talk about how adherence to the rules of kasherut changed the way Italian Jews ate. So imagine you're an Italian citizen, but you're also Jewish. You want to eat like everyone else does in the country. Like I wanted as a kid to eat lasagna like everyone else does, but you can't because there's a number of things that you're not allowed. You're not allowed, for example, to mix meat and milk. So when I was trying to gather recipes and think what would belong in this book, another thing that I wanted to highlight was how eating kosher has shaped the way the Jews of Italy eat, despite the fact that they're regular Italians, so they still want to eat Italian food. So, for example, you would find lasagna on a Jewish household table, just slightly different than the regular lasagna that you would find in a Christian or a Catholic household. and so on and so forth. How did we do it? Mostly with 3 tricks. The Jews of Italy replaced, but I mean, I guess everywhere in the world we do that these days, replaced broth for milk, oil for butter, and goose for pork. I guess goose for pork is the most interesting one, but just to put it into perspective, for example, to make the famous lasagna that I was talking about, a bechamel sauce is generally made with butter and milk, and we cannot mix that with, the bolognese sauce, which is made with meat. So people would, for example, make a bechamel sauce out of broth and oil instead of milk and butter. Is it identical to the real deal? Absolutely not. Is it still delicious? And if I blindfold you, wouldn't you be able to tell the difference when the lasagna is ready? Yes. So that was the way we worked around our regulations to still eat what everyone else was eating. The most interesting story of these ones, other than the lasagna, is probably the goose versus pork situation. Italians consume a great deal of pork products, especially obviously charcuterie, the prosciutto and mortadella and all of those things, salami. And the Jews of Italy also wanted their fair share of all of these delicious things for their aperitivo, so for the happy hour. So what did they do? They started to cook with goose instead of pork. Goose is kosher. It's readily available in northern Italy. So they started using goose exactly like they would use pork. There's a saying in Italian that goes roughly like this, that we don't throw anything away of a piece of pork. Like if you have a pork, you're going to cook every piece of it. That's what the Jews did with the goose, to the point that the goose started to be called the pork of the Jews. They would literally get a nice goose, and I've been trying to do that myself, like actually from the whole animal, and use every single piece to prepare different specialties that were really, really distinctively Jewish, in the sense that the Catholic didn't need that. They could eat pork. So they started commissioning to Catholic butchers and to other artisans the preparation of more or less kosher, because these were not certified kosher in the old days, but more or less kosher products that would look like the Christian available products like charcuterie, prosciutto, and whatever, but would be made out of goose. So in the book, you'll find how to make your own kosher prosciutto. It's a bit of a project, but if you're feeling crafty, I think it's worth it, alongside with other things that you can do once you get your hands on an actual goose. And one more of these stories, but again, it's similar to the one of the lasagna. For example, Italians eat a lot of pastries. We like to have our breakfast sweet and also our afternoon snack, the so-called merenda, after you come home from school, is generally a sweet pastry. So to avoid eating too close to lunch or too close to dinner food that contained milk, we would generally cook, make our pastries, make our shortbread, make our short crust with oil instead of butter. Again, would you be able to tell the difference a bit? But as a kid, are you delighted that you get the same cake that everyone else is eating and you're not the only kid that doesn't get it? Absolutely. So this was another aspect of the way the Jews of Italy eat and cook that I tried to stuff into the book. What do I have next? Okay, I'm fighting against time because I want to cook and I want to talk, but I'll try speed this up. So Italy is a peninsula. Historically, it's been it's been substantially fragmented. We changed the regions, we shuffled them a few times, but there's about 20, 21, depending historically when you check. As you can see, it's like a puzzle of sorts. And every part of the puzzle had its own history, its own regulation, its own rulers, they were literally like tiny little states until Italy unified as a country. So each tiny little state treated the Jews differently because they had their own power situation. And so that determined how the Jews lived in the different parts of the country. And of course, that in turn determined how they cooked. Skip slide. Let's go to the next one. Perfect. So I'll just try to walk you really quickly through the peninsula. But then for those who have the book, you will find that I have inserted in every, in between chapters, there are little inserts about the cities of Italy. So if you ever decide to go visit Italy, there's a little like, there's a few insights about each big for 32,000 of us, big Jewish city with a Jewish population, where to go, what to eat, what are the local specialties with the Jewish history. But again, let's go back to our trip through the peninsula. Central and Southern Italy, all you want to know is that those were the historical communities that first established themselves in Italy, very numerous until the Alhambra decree that I mentioned earlier. When the Jews were expelled from Spain, they were expelled from Southern Italy too. So at that point, they had to shift towards Rome and then slowly all towards the north. What you want to know about these communities is that these were the clever Jews that traded a lot. They brought ingredients that Italians didn't have. Italians didn't have eggplants, like I said before, but they didn't have artichokes, for example. They also thought that artichokes were another really weird and mysterious ingredient. And truth be told, when you look at an artichoke, it's rather weird. Fennel, no idea what fennel was. Cardoons, I bet none of you knows what cardoons are, but for those who do, for those who don't know, cardoons are like a thistle. They're like a vegetable that you have to peel really in depth before you can eat it, but very yummy once you know how to cook it, as well as many spices. These were a lot of ingredients that Italians had no clue about. The Jews brought them to them, specifically the Jews of southern Italy. Slide. Up in the north, two other places of Jewish interest were and are Venice and Trieste. These cities had three Jewish populations in one city. They had the Tedeschi Jews, which were the Jews that came from Germany, so those were more like the Ashkenazi types. Those Tedeschi Jews brought to Italy the German culinary tradition, specifically taught Italians and Jews how to cook with goose and duck. So that's where we learned to make our charcuterie kosher. Then they had the second group, which was the Ponentini Jews that fled Spain and Portugal and settled in Venice. What these Jews brought to our cuisine were a few ingredients. We cook a lot with marzipan. You'll find that there's a lot of recipes in the book that have almond and almond products. It makes sense when you think about it because it's good for Passover, it's good year around. So marzipan as an ingredient, salted cod, which when you think about it, these were people that were traveling on boats for a really long time, so they had to preserve their fish to make it last longer. Today, again, in northern Italy, salted cod is widely consumed and cooked in a lot of local specialties, but it was a very Jewish ingredient back then. And citruses. When you think about citrus as in the etrog, just so we're clear about, not all of the oranges and lemons, but citrus as the fruit, citron, I guess you call it, citron as the fruit. Those were ingredients that the Jews cooked a lot with. And generally, when we have these ingredients in a recipe, we can sort of start digging to see if that recipe had a Jewish story, because these are sort of telltale ingredients. And lastly, the third group of Jews that established themselves in that area were the Levantini. These were Jews from the Levant, obviously, Egypt, Syria, and Turkey. And they brought a very specific preparation that has a funny story again. Pine nuts, raisins, and saor. So saor is a preparation where you put pine nuts and raisins and vinegar, and you use it to preserve food. If you go to Venice, everyone in Venice is super proud of their sardine saor, which are sardines, but sizable sardines, fried and sort of left to marinate in this mixture of vinegar, raisins, onions, and pine nuts. Not a Venetian dish, like they did not invent it. They think they did. But again, it was the Jews, the Jewish merchants that traded with Venice, because Venice was a big town for commerce, that brought this specific way to preserve fish, again, because that's the way the fish traveled on the boats, to the Venetians. How do we know it? Because the first recorded recipe for this dish included, again, citron. an ingredient that Italians didn't know how to cook with. It was literally just the Jews that had leftover at Rog, virtually, that would cook with citron. Nowhere else you would find in those days citron used as an ingredient. Slide. Battling against time. Now, Rome is our biggest Jewish community today. If you come to Italy, that's the one you want to check out, mostly because that's where most of the Jews live. The vast majority of our population lives there, depending how you count, 13 to 20,000 Jews. As always, if you ask a Jew if they're Jewish, they all have opinions about how Jewish, secular, religious, conservative, who knows. But roughly, those are the numbers. And that's our most picturesque, I'm going to say, Jewish community in a way, in the sense that most of the Jews of Rome, although not all of them, still live in the ghetto area. What am I doing wrong? Oh, yes, I will. I know. I'm just speaking as fast as I can. I'm just too excited about it. So that's a town that you want to visit whenever you're going to be in Italy. The picture that you see is a pizza, but it's not a pizza. It's called the pizza de veride. It's obviously not a pizza in the traditional sense of Italian pizza, but that's one of the specialties that they make in Rome, which you should try if you're ever in town. I'll tell you more stories about Rome later, because otherwise we'll never get to cooking. Skip. I'll tell you about all this stuff while I'm cooking. Otherwise, we'll never get to cooking. Save my email if you've got questions and let me. Yeah, and whenever we've got questions, we can take care of them. So I'll tell you more about the food if we have time at the end. What am I trying to accomplish here on this side of the table? We're trying to do two things. I cheated, obviously, because I prepped ahead. Otherwise, we will never go to sleep tonight. But we're going to try to make concha di zucchine, which is marinated zucchini in some sort of a sour dressing, I guess, with herbs. And we're trying to make amaretti cookies. While amaretti cookies are not technically Jewish, as in originally a Jewish recipe, it's a great recipe because it works for the holidays. The Jews prepare it especially for Passover because it doesn't have flour. So we have sort of adopted it into our repertoire, I guess. So let me start with that. And if whoever has the questions, if there are questions, if anyone wants to ask questions, I can hopefully talk and cook at the same time. Just anyway, for the time being, I'm just breaking an egg, keeping the egg white and tossing away the egg yolk.
Anybody have a question? Oh, she's good.
No questions?
Okay, just raise your hand and I'll come.
That's fine too.
So just a question that's not really to the point. Is your shop, your cafe on 20th Street?
Correct, on 19.
19th. I had a wonderful chocolate croissant there a couple
I'm
weeks
glad
ago.
to hear. 19 and Broadway in Santa Monica.
Lodi Cafe. Lodi. Santa Monica. Near the If there's anybody online on Zoom, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A and we'll ask.
As soon as I'm done with this loud thing, I'll talk more. Actually, if I talk, can you hear me all right? Okay, so never mind this one. So I can tell you about the slides that I was going to skip, or we can answer that question down there from the lady in purple.
Hi, so I'm just curious, why goose? I want to know why goose instead of any other kind of meat or something.
No, I'm going to have to ask you again.
Why goose instead of pork? I mean, was there no other options?
No, I think it's the one. So, in terms of, I think so. You could have obviously done things with cows and things like that, but I think in terms of size and preservation of the products, it worked well. We do have a few charcuterie products. There's also a couple in the book that are made with beef. But I'm going to say the distinctively Jewish thing to do was the goose specifically. Now, one of the reasons is that up in the north of Italy, geese were readily available. Like it was just the easiest thing to do. You would have them running in your courtyard. You didn't need a full stable and a thing with a cow and whatever. Even if you were relatively poor, you could just have them available around the neighborhood. And the weather favored apparently raising these animals. Don't ask me why. I tried. My parents have a property, I guess, outside of town in Milan, and I really wanted to have my own goose to make my own prosciutto, right? Because if you're an Italian Jew and you want your goose to be kosher, you can't. You got to order it from France. And that's exotic and expensive. So I was like, I'm going to raise my own goose. Not exactly myself, but I'm going to have somebody try to do it for me. And apparently it's very easy in northern Italy, because that's what they do. Now, 1 second to finish these egg whites. And we should be good to continue.
Benedetta, I have a question from online. Do you use the same spices that we use in Italian cooking here in America, such as oregano, garlic, red pepper? Delightful presentation. Wish I was there.
So spices. Oregano, yes. We do cook a lot with what's it called, parsley. This can. Okay, we're done with this dreadful task. I just whipped the egg whites. I didn't do anything extravagant. Parsley a lot, oregano, yes. Saffron, very Jewish thing to do. Apparently, Italians knew how to cook with saffron until the Middle Ages. Then they forgot. Literally, at some point, they stopped. They didn't use it as much. And then again, the Jews brought saffron back into fashion. So saffron, very Jewish ingredient. We cook with tomato and extravagant lot. I mean, it's obviously not a spice, but you'll find that a lot of the recipes in the book are very red. There's tomato in a number of places. What else? Not a lot of pepper. I mean, pepper, regular, just black pepper for dressing food, but we don't do spicy much. There is just literally one spicy recipe in the dish, in the book, which I think is actually interesting, and I'll tell you about. I just chucked in here almond and sugar until it comes together with the eggs. That's all I did. And I had Robin assisting me because she's really kind. But I'll show you what I do just so we know. I make tiny balls, more or less like this. Then I flatten them a bit. I don't even know whatever people are going to be seeing, but I hope they see something. No, it's nothing exotic. There we are, much better for them. And then if I have them at hand, I would generally put an almond in the middle. And that's it. That's my little amaretti ready to go in the, oopsie. I'm not the best with my hands, filthy, but there we go. Now, if I don't have almonds, they can happily go without almonds, but if you have them, they look prettier. So I might outsource these ones to Robin, who is volunteering to help me. Wash my hand and be right back. Actually, I don't need to wash my hand. I can probably just do this.
Well, we have another question online while you're doing that. Just a personal question. Why did you come to the U.S.?
Oh, thank you for the question. That's sweet. I came to the U.S. because my boyfriend lives here. So I didn't have much of a choice. we actually tried to live in Israel for a while. That's where I actually wanted to live. But it didn't work out for a number of logistical reasons. So we ended up back in the US. And that's why I'm here. But before I forget, because I interrupted myself, the spices question. So there's literally one recipe in the book that is spicy. And I'd like to tell you about it because it helps me going back to the history. So remember in our first slide how I had down the foundation of the State of Israel among the other dates? So after the war, the Jewish community of Italy wasn't in great shape. We didn't suffer as much as the Germans and the Polish and whatever, but our community was relatively small. Still is, as I told you. But we've been lucky to get a really big contribution to our Jewish numbers with the Jews of the Arab world. My family itself comes from Libya. There were all these Jews that came from Lebanon, Libya, Iran, Morocco, after or around the foundation of the State of Israel, when the Arab countries started to be really nasty to their Jews and have pogroms and things. So a number of Jews from the northern countries in the Mediterranean started to fly, like to escape from their countries of origin, and some of them settled in Italy. So that's where my family came from. And so we have one recipe in the book that I put there as a representative of those communities, because they all contributed eventually to what we now think of as Italian cuisine. So the dish that I'm talking about is called hraimi. It's like a spicy fish dish. It's a starter. If you go to Rome, a number of authentic generations back Roman families have started to make this dish because their daughter or their son married a Jew of Libyan origin in the case of their recipe. So the recipes have started to switch between the two a dot in a way between the actual Italian that have been there for generations and the Italians that have sort of more recently become Italian coming from other countries. So while Robin is making our cookies very generously, I started slicing my zucchini. Now, there's great debate about how you should slice zucchini for this recipe because, you know, one Jew, three opinions or whatever is it that they say. So the idea is that you slice them one way or another, either like this or diagonally. So some people like them sliced this way. Either way, they're going to be delicious. I wouldn't do them in rounds, as in coins, because they would get really mushy really quickly because they would be small. But you can cut them whichever way you like, as long as they are more or less in slices. What are we going to do with the zucchini? We're going to fry them. Now, wish me luck, because I don't generally cook with this thing. Let's hope it works. One question that I get asked a lot, and I'm going to ask myself so I can answer it, is about the oil that we cook with. In Italy, we cook an extravagant lot with olive oil, with extra virgin olive oil, which is obviously very expensive in the US. And specifically, what we do is we cook with extra virgin olive oil virtually anything other than when we're baking. If we're baking, most of the time, most of the recipes call for other oils, such as, you know, grapeseed, peanut, whatever you have at hand. Preferably not canola, I'm not a fan, but other than that, other vegetable oils, because they're less flavorful. Nothing prevents you from cooking from also baking with olive oil, but it tastes like olive oil, so I would generally avoid that. But everything else we generally do with extra virgin olive oil, which, like I said, is expensive if you live in the US. So I'm taking out a slice of apple from this miniature apple that I had in my fridge. It's a cute trick that I like to teach to people that start looking great. 25, we'll check then. Those are going in the oven at, we said 300, right? Local temperature. In my head, I still count in Celsius and in grams, so bear with me. So those are going in the oven. Apple for frying. It takes away the smell, or at least so the legend says in Italy, and I religiously, continue to do that. And not only takes away the smell, but when you put it in the pot, you can start seeing when the oil starts bubbling up around the apple. That's when your vegetable or whatever is it that you're frying is ready for frying. So I can't really see what I'm doing. Can they see in there? You can see that the apples are slowly starting to bubble up. So that supposedly helps with both the smell of the frying food and checking the temperature. So let me see in this little mess of zucchini that I've made what I can save.
We have another question online while you're slicing. I've heard cucina povera, if I'm pronouncing that right, started mostly with Jews generally, not just eggplant, but spinach as well.
So, spinach is a tiny bit debatable, but but I love the point about cucina povera. So, Jews were obviously poor. So there's a number of recipes that you will also find in the book where that feature ingredients that most of the rest of the Italian population wouldn't want to cook with. There's this expression in Italian which we use. It's called quinto quarto. The quinto quarto is the fifth part of the cow, the part that nobody wanted. Like once you're done with, the fillet and the ribeye and the whatever, I forget how you call the different parts of the cow in here. Once you're done with all of the desirable part of the cows, the less desirable cuts were the cuts that the Jews would cook with. One of them, for example, is oxtail. Now we think of oxtail as something yummy, and sometimes, you find it at the restaurant, they make yummy things with it. But oxtail, all of the gizzards, I have no idea how you pronounce gizzards, so that thing, all of the gizzards, all of the entrails, all of the bits and pieces that nobody wanted, the Jews cooked with. So there's a number of old recipes of Jewish origin that were essentially cucina povera, in the sense that they used the most humble part of the different animals because that's what they could afford. And they obviously made delicious dishes out of that too. Now, in addition to that, another interesting story actually that goes in that direction is the story in Sicily of pane cameusa. Pane cameusa is like a dish of it's imagine like a sandwich with spleen. Now, Jews cannot eat spleen, not kosher, I believe. So what did they do? They would get spleen for working as butchers at the market. The butchers would give away to the Jews any leftovers. So the Jews found themselves with spleen that they couldn't eat themselves. But they started making this special dish with the spleen fried and then served into a sandwich that became really, really popular. Everybody loved it. So to this day, when you go to Palermo to the local market, one of the local specialties is this dish made with spleen in a sandwich, which originated from the fact that Jews had all of these undesirable leftovers of meat available that they couldn't eat. So they started to prep them and sell them. So that's one of those stories where it's actually the Jews cooking for the non-Jews, but out of necessity, like, with whatever they had at hand. So I'm trying to get these zucchinis to fry. They surely are, slowly but surely.
What are you doing time-wise?
In the meantime, I cheated, and back home, I prepared some more zucchini. Now, if you can fry them, if you don't mind frying, the more the merrier. We're very happy. They're delicious fried. If you don't want to fry them, oven baking them will work just okay. So don't bother to fry if you don't like frying. But if you don't mind frying, they're very yummy fried. Same recipe, you can do concha di melanzane with eggplants. So same story, fry the eggplants and continue, as you will see when I continue with the recipe.
Benedetta, we probably need to wrap up in about 2-3 minutes.
Let's do it this way.
I hate to do this. It's so interesting. We have a question.
Forget these eggplants. Forget the zucchini. And let me show you how we finished the dish. Anyway, I got this ready. By the way, this was how the amaretti should come out when they're in the oven. You'll get to taste them. They're right there on the table. I made them for you.
I just want to ask you, did you develop your recipes or did you get them handed down from friends, relatives?
Very valid question. So it's a bit of a mix in the sense that when I started food writing, I was mostly writing my own recipes. But as I started researching the book and I wanted to collect more recipes, I started traveling all over Italy to, you know, the grandmas and the aunts and the whoever was willing to chat with me. I'm chopping some mint. You guys, I don't know, whoever can see it, I'll stay here. To start collecting recipes from different sources other than, you know, my family. So eventually I ended up with some sort of a grand tour of Italy, trying to speak to everyone who was willing to chat to me. Also, a few recipes are archive recipes. Italy is blessed with a few local institutions, I guess, such as the CEDEC in Milan, which is where I used to live, that preserve Jewish history for, you know, for the local families. So a lot of families donate manuscript, donate whatever interesting stuff they have, and a lot of those manuscripts sometimes, if you're lucky, are recipes. So I've been digging through those too. So it's a bit of a mix between me, the actual grandmas, and the archive work. So just so we wrap up and you guys know what I would be doing, I'd be layering my zucchinis, fried or oven baked, whatever you prefer. Then I would be putting some mint, some parsley.
It's
Now,
served cold?
yes. There's debate among the grandmas whether it should be mint, basil, or both, but there surely is parsley. So we're gonna put some parsley. Oh, well. Thank you. So a bit of parsley, a bit of mint. I'll try to finish it real quick. Garlic in abundance. What makes this dish yummy is the garlic.
I think it's on page 46 or 246.
A bit of vinegar. It's Italian parsley. I mean, the curly one from here will be fine too, but preferably I would say the Italian. Just not cilantro, I was about to say, God forbid.
You were saying that you could also fry eggplant.
The same identical thing with eggplants, correct.
Do you have to prepare it in any way before you fry it because it's bitter?
I don't believe in eggplants. Who's speaking? Because I don't see the person. Hey, I don't really believe in eggplants being bitter. Like, I do it because I'm told so. Like, you know, you drain them with salt because your mother told you so. But have you ever really tried not to do it and see how it tasted? I think it's just fine. I mean, if I don't have time, I'll cut that corner. And I'm known for cutting corners. But if I didn't have time, I wouldn't worry the smallest bit. Now, if you do have time, why not? Drain them, like slice them, salt them, press them, and let them drain. So I would continue on with my activity of layering things until I'm done with the ingredients. And that would be roughly it. At that point, I would let it sit in the fridge for as long as I can. I'm going to say like an afternoon, so that all of the flavors sort of get together. And then I would serve. The one thing I didn't say is I would put, after, when I'm done with all of my layers, I would put olive oil as well. So I have some olive oil on the side. You can preserve this dish. So if you want to make it, put it in a can type of thing. And then you know how to safely sterilize a can. That's something you can do too, because they would last you in the pantry very well. as long as the can has been boiled. And that's, I guess, about it. If there are any more questions or anything else, I am available. And in the meantime, I continue to squeeze garlic, which is one of my favorite things.
Well, let's give a thank you. So while we're watching Benedetta finish, let me give you just a little commercial for some of our events coming up. We have three events coming this week. Well, first, the book is available to purchase tonight. We've got a lot of copies, and when Benedetta's done,
I shall sign them too.
Be able to sign them for you. And Hanukkah's coming, so if you've got some cooks or foodies in the family, it's a great gift.
I'm told it makes a great gift and a great conversation starter. Now, don't ask me what a conversation starter exactly is, but I'm told it makes a great one.
For those of you on Zoom, you can purchase the book at your local bookstore, or I believe in the chat, there's the link to the Amazon Federation site. You can copy that down and purchase the book that way. Okay, the next three events really quickly. This Sunday, November 6th at 4 p.m. at Temple Ami Shalom in West Covina, Andrew Lawler will be discussing his book, Under Jerusalem. You'll hear more about the excavations under the city and how biblical archaeology began and the effects on current events in the Middle East. Next Wednesday, November 9th at 10:30 a.m. at the Altadena Country Club, please join us for a buffet brunch, and hear B.A. Shapiro, a New York Times bestselling author, discuss her latest novel, Metropolis. Inspired by the story of an old brick storage warehouse, she weaves a tale of 6 people from different backgrounds whose possessions sit in a storage unit. We still have spaces available. We'd love to see you in person. It's been wonderful to have so many and share a meal together. So the link is open until Thursday, so we hope you can join there. And one last event is new this year for the book festival. We're introducing One Book, One Community, where everyone is encouraged to read the book before the program and the live author event. This novel won the 2021 National Jewish Book Award for debut fiction. It's called A Play for the End of the World by Jai Chakrabarty, and it's available to purchase tonight and read before the event. We actually have several book clubs who have selected this book for their November read. And you can bring it and have the authors sign.